Welcome back to From Washington al Mundo. My name is Mauricio Claver-Carone, and it's a great privilege to be here with Shahriar Etminani of the Iran Democratic Union, talking about this issue of Iran. And we're going to now touch upon U.S. policy towards Iran, such a critical issue at a critical time of great danger to a lot of countries throughout the world. Before we went to break, we were talking about the power structure of Iran. So we talked about the Ayatollah, so the theocracy, the dictators on top. But a lot of people, and what we see a lot, is become this character, which I guess the best I can call it, of Ahmadinejad. Mm-hmm. Where does he fall within the power structure of Iran?
Well, he's the president, but the reality is he's basically an irrelevant little peon. I think the way to look at the Islamic Republic is you do have Khamenei, the Velayat Faqih at the top, the representative of God on earth. God help us all. And then beneath him, you have various silos of power. The presidency is one of them. But you have the Revolutionary Guards, and you have various other groups. And really, the way to really understand it is to view it like a mafia organization, with various families kind of banding together when necessary to survive. But in the meantime, fighting each other for money and power and influence. So if you look at it that way, then things start falling into place about what they're doing, why they're doing, etc., etc. Ahmadinejad, he's the head of the government, but he is certainly not the main issue. The government is not the issue. The issue is the regime on the whole. And when, for example, President Obama goes on television and, in his New Year speech to the Iranian people, he talks about your government has been repressing you for the last 2 years. It infuriates people like me because that implies that the regime has not been repressing people for the 30 years prior to the last 2 years. It's an indication of where the State Department falls into the fight on Iran right now.
Well, it always seems with a lot of these dictatorships, and a lot of times policymakers and intellectuals, they like to look within these regimes and they say, well, these guys are hardliners, and these guys within the regime, and these guys are reformists. So Rafsanjani, when he was president, he was a reformist. Now Ahmadinejad, he's a hardliner. And the top of those dictatorships love to play that game, because at the end of the day, you're just kind of shuffling personalities while the dictator remains per se. Talk to me a little bit about the notion of these reformers within the Iranian regime.
I think that comes to the broader issue that we'll be discussing about what's the best case scenario for Iran, for the world when it comes to Iran, and for the Iranian people, as far as I'm concerned. I think the reformers are led by Khatami, 8-year president of the Islamic Republic, behind the scenes somewhat by Rafsanjani, another 8 years president, and basically the kingmaker within the system. And then their kind of little stooges like Mousavi and Karoubi. The thing that the world forgot is that they are absolutely part of the establishment. And they don't want a true free democracy, because in a true free democracy, A has to be secular by definition, because you can't have a non-secular democracy, and I think we've proven that in the last 32 years. But in a true democracy, there'll be no role for a character like Mousavi, who is responsible for the murder of tens of thousands of people when he was prime minister in the 80s. There'll certainly be no role for a Rafsanjani, who has been as brutal as anyone out there, and is probably one of the most corrupt people in certainly in the history of Iran, and probably around the world. So again, let's come back to U.S. policy. So when Secretary Clinton not too long ago went on BBC Persian and VOA Persian and used the excuse that after the 2009 elections, when we had millions of people on the streets looking for change, looking for freedom, looking for democracy, and there was absolutely no action from the United States administration. And she used the excuse that we were told by the opposition leaders not to get involved. She misses the point that those so-called opposition leaders are all regime insiders. And of course they don't want the world to get involved, because they don't want the people to succeed in their quest for freedom.
And that plays right into, at the end of the day, the dictatorships, what they do is they put out these reformers and things of the sort because they want the world to think that there's no alternative. There's no democratic alternative. What is the democratic alternative?
I will go on record and claim, and I really truly believe this, that the reformers in Iran have done more to keep this regime in power than the hardliners or any Basiji or Revolutionary Guard could. Because what they have done is give the people false hope. So imagine a pressure cooker. And Iran is very much a pressure cooker. And because people have no social freedom, no political freedom, no economic freedom, they don't have any freedom whatsoever. They've got no hope, no future. So what historically they've done is whenever that pressure built, they managed to open the valve, and the valve was reform, through the smiley face of Khatami, who, is in my opinion one of the greatest tyrants, through people like him to alleviate some of the pressure. What happened in 2009 elections and the way the system came out and brutalized the people overtly in the streets, it showed any rational person inside Iran and outside of Iran that this regime is not capable of reform and it will not reform. So hopefully, one big positive that came out of the election of 2009 was to show the world, and more importantly, to show the Iranian people that you cannot reform this regime.
Now, clarify this scenario for me. Mm-hmm. So in 2009, there was elections.
Yes.
Now, that in itself, obviously, we're talking still about a dictatorship. Mm-hmm. We saw the Green Movement that became developed. We'll talk about whether the administration and the United States missed an opportunity. If the outcome of the election would have come out differently, what would we have seen in Iran? Now, aside from the movement of people that just wanted change, period. I mean, I think it was that was a change movement. But procedurally, technically, what would have been the different outcome?
The only difference, in my opinion, would have been rhetoric. The substance would be absolutely the same.
Because at the end of the day, the supreme leader...
And not just the supreme leader, the entire structure, the entire system is based on anti-Americanism. I mean, the most common slogan in Iran is Magba America, death to America. So, the system was built on that. Yeah. So we would have had the same exact intrinsic policies, but with a smilier face and with false hope for the Iranian people. So in many ways, it would have been worse because the world wouldn't have been alerted to the danger as much. They wouldn't be aware of the true nature of the regime, and the people would have been given false hope, and they would have continued under the assumption that we can reform the system.
So here we are, a few blocks away from Congress, a few more blocks away from the White House. Who should they be embracing in Iran? What is that democratic alternative in Iran? Okay.
I personally, we've been down the road of the charismatic, singular leader. We've had it with our monarchy for centuries, and unfortunately, we had it with Khomeini 32 years ago. The reality is that, given a choice, I believe that a vast majority of people in Iran will pick a free secular democracy. And there are, numerous nodes of opposition. They might not all be working under the same umbrella, but most of them are working with the same goal. And there isn't one single charismatic leader that we can point to and say, we need to support him. Fortunately, we don't have a Chalabi. Fortunately, we don't have anyone like that. So basically, we need to, I think we need to step back. Okay, we need to step back and look at.
Let me ask you this: what should, in 2009,
Mm-hmm.
there was an opportunity in the sense that there was a momentum for change.
Yeah.
And the people, that's what they sensed.
Mm-hmm.
The administration, it was a new administration, it was their first year. They took the approach of not provoking. As you said, Secretary Clinton was advised that, there were reformers, that the reformers didn't want the United States to become involved because it might be counterproductive. What should have the United? Obviously, that did not work.
Yeah.
That was a failure and a missed historic opportunity, and I think pretty much everybody agrees with that now. What should they have done different?
Okay. Number one, to come out full force behind the people and recognize that they're out in the streets. Why they're out in the streets? They're out in the streets because they want freedom and democracy, which by definition means an absolute end to this regime. Okay? They were basically conned by the reform leaders of Iran. They need to come out and say, we hear you in your quest for freedom and democracy, and this is what we're going to do about it. Number one, we are not going to talk to this regime anymore. I know in June of 2009, they were in the middle of this whole concept of negotiation. At that point, they should have made it clear that we will not deal with this regime, no matter who the government is, anymore. Full stop. We will put full economic and other pressure on this regime, with the goal of helping you, the Iranian people, the true Democrats, to get rid of this regime. That's something they should have done then. That's something they should do right now. The problem is, in the last 32 years, the U.S. policy in Iran has been bipolar. And again, we've got the 1 minute mark, and I think we need a little more than 1 minute. So.
We'll definitely start wrapping up with that. And something else that I want to talk about when we come back is in regards to the Arab Spring. A lot of people have talked about the Arab Spring. Iran seemed to have a particular role. It seemed that at the beginning, Iran wanted to essentially influence, thinking that there were a lot of fundamentalists, etc., in those movements, and there have been, being that the Muslim Brotherhood was involved in Egypt and so forth. But it seems that Turkey has come out as the prevailing model that a lot of those movement wants, to Iran's chagrin. We'll be back.
Perfect.
From Washington al Mundo on Iran with Mauricio Claver-Carone and my guest Shahriar Etminani.